I overheard my cheating wife mocking me to her coworkers. I can dump him anytime. He's useless to me. I just walked outside. One quiet phone call later, her boss stormed into the party, grabbed her arm, and screamed, "What did you do?" My name is Marcus Hale, and let me tell you something right off the bat. I've never been the type of guy who gets off on corporate small talk and watered-down cocktails served by college kids in booties. But there I was, standing in some overpriced hotel ballroom because my wife Claire had pulled out every guilt trip in the book to drag me to her company's annual team-building shindig. You know the drill. Mandatory fun with a capital F, where everyone pretends they actually give a damn about quarterly reports and workplace synergy while secretly plotting their escape routes to the nearest bar. The whole scene was exactly what I'd expected. A perfectly choreographed nightmare of middle management trying way too hard to look important. The music was loud enough to make your ears bleed, but not quite loud enough to drown out the sound of people laughing at jokes that weren't funny. And don't even get me started on the champagne. I'm pretty sure they bought it in bulk from some discount warehouse. The kind of bubbly that tastes like carbonated regret with a hint of why did I agree to this? I'd planted myself strategically near the coat rack in the back corner of the room, which gave me the perfect vantage point to watch the circus unfold while staying close enough to my exit strategy. Call it survival instinct, call it social anxiety, call it whatever you want. I knew I'd need a quick getaway before someone cornered me to discuss their kids' soccer tournament or their thoughts on the latest company restructuring. These events had a way of sucking the life out of me faster than a vampire with a caffeine addiction. Claire, on the other hand, was in her absolute element. She'd been working this room like a politician running for office, floating from group to group in that glittery dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her laugh, God, that laugh, had been echoing across the ballroom all night, getting sharper and more grating with each glass of cheap champagne she knocked back. I'd been married to the woman for 8 years, so I knew the signs. When Claire got drunk at work functions, she turned into this weird hybrid of motivational speaker and reality TV villain. All confidence and cutting remarks disguised as humor. I was checking my watch for probably the 15th time in 10 minutes, calculating exactly how much longer I had to endure this social torture before I could reasonably claim exhaustion and head home. When I heard it, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a knife through butter, crystal clear despite the distance between us. Honestly, I can dump him anytime I want, she was saying, and I felt my blood turn to ice water in my veins. He's completely useless to me at this point. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl as those words hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo load of betrayal. I turned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of her through the crowd. And there she was, head tilted back in that way she did when she thought she was being particularly clever. Her dress catching the light from the cheap chandeliers overhead. She was surrounded by her usual work crew, the same people who'd been kissing her ass all evening, and they were all nodding along like she'd just delivered some profound wisdom instead of casually destroying her marriage with a few careless sentences. But here's the kicker, and this is the part that really made my stomach drop. Her boss, Mr. Peterson, was standing right there next to her. Not just standing, mind you, but close enough that his hand kept brushing against her arm in a way that looked way too familiar, way too practiced, like they'd done this dance before, like this was just another Tuesday for them. The rational part of my brain wanted to march over there and demand an explanation. The emotional part wanted to grab the nearest champagne bottle and make a scene that would end up on YouTube by morning. But instead, I just stood there like an idiot, watching my wife of 8 years casually announce to her coworkers that I was disposable while her married boss played grab like he was auditioning for a harassment lawsuit. You know what's funny about moments like these? Everyone talks about the dramatic confrontation, the big blow-up, the screaming match that clears the air. But sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon in your arsenal. So I didn't yell. I didn't storm over there and cause a scene. I didn't even let my face show what I was feeling, which was roughly equivalent to being hit by a bus driven by my own stupidity. Instead, I simply turned around, grabbed my coat from the rack, and walked out of that hotel ballroom like I was just stepping out for some fresh air. The night air hit me like a slap across the face. Cold enough to make my eyes water, but somehow not cold enough to numb the burning sensation in my chest. I pulled my coat tight around me and started walking. My dress shoes clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like the countdown to my marriage's execution. I must have walked 3 blocks before I stopped, standing under a street light like some kind of noir movie cliché, pulling out my phone with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in probably 2 years, maybe longer. Adrian Knox, my old law school buddy, who'd somehow ended up working in compliance at Claire's company. Funny how life works out sometimes. The phone rang twice before he picked up, sounding slightly confused, but not entirely surprised to hear from me. "Marcus, dude, it's been forever. What's up?" My voice came out calmer than I expected, steady and controlled, like I was ordering coffee instead of potentially nuking my entire life. "Adrian, you still tight with the executive team over there?" "Yeah, why? You sound weird, man." "Good," I said, watching my breath form little clouds in the cold air. "You're going to want to check on something right now tonight before morning comes and everything gets complicated." I told him just enough to get the wheels turning. Gave him just the right breadcrumbs to follow the trail I wanted him to find. Because here's the thing about guys like Adrian. They're natural-born investigators. And once you point them in the right direction, they can't help but dig deeper. Within minutes of hanging up, I knew the first domino had started to wobble. By the time I slipped into my car, engine purring to life in the quiet night, I had a pretty good feeling that Claire's evening wasn't going to end the way she'd planned. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a dish served cold. Sometimes it's a phone call made at exactly the right moment to exactly the right person. And as I drove away from that hotel, leaving behind the sound of fake laughter and corporate, I couldn't help but smile. After all, she'd call me useless. Time to prove her wrong. So there I was, standing on the curb like some kind of wounded animal licking his wounds. Except instead of bleeding, I was just really pissed off and trying to figure out how to channel that rage into something productive. The street light above me was flickering like it was having its own existential crisis, which seemed pretty fitting given the circumstances. My phone felt heavier than it should have in my hands as I scrolled through my contacts, looking for a name I hadn't thought about in way too long. Adrian Knox, the guy who used to sit behind me in constitutional law, always cracking jokes about how our professor looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. We'd been tight back in law school, study partners, drinking buddies, the kind of friends who could finish each other's legal briefs after too many beers and too little sleep. But you know how it goes with old college friends. Life happens. Careers take off in different directions. And before you know it, Christmas cards turn into Facebook likes, which turn into absolutely nothing at all. Last I'd heard, Adrian had landed himself a cushy job in corporate compliance somewhere, which at the time had seemed like the most boring possible career path for a guy who used to debate constitutional amendments until 3 o'clock in the morning just for fun. But standing there in the cold, watching my marriage implode in real time, I was starting to think that maybe boring corporate jobs had their advantages. Especially when those boring corporate jobs happen to be at your cheating wife's company. See, the thing about having a photographic memory. And yeah, I'm one of those annoying people who actually remembers every damn detail of every conversation I've ever had, is that you tend to file away random pieces of information that seemed completely useless at the time. Like the fact that Claire had mentioned maybe 6 months ago during some mindless dinner conversation that the new compliance guy seemed really smart and actually kind of funny for a lawyer. She'd even mentioned his name, Adrian something, Knox, maybe. At the time, I'd filed it away under work gossip I don't care about and promptly forgotten about it. But now, standing in the cold with my wife's betrayal still ringing in my ears, that random piece of information suddenly seemed like the most important thing in the world. Because if Adrian Knox was the same Adrian Knox I used to know, and what were the odds of there being 2 Adrian Knoxes in corporate compliance in the same city, then I had just stumbled onto the kind of inside connection that could turn this whole situation from a personal disaster into something much more interesting. I hit the call button before I could talk myself out of it. The phone rang once, twice, and for a second I thought maybe he wouldn't pick up. After all, who the hell calls their old law school buddy at? I checked my watch. 10:30 on a Friday night, but then I heard that familiar voice, slightly confused, but unmistakably Adrian Marcus. Holy dude. Is that really you? Hey man, I said, trying to keep my voice casual even though my heart was beating like I just run a marathon. Yeah, it's me. I know it's been forever. Forever is right. What's it been, like 2 years? 3. Jesus, man. How are you? What's going on? This was the tricky part. I needed to give him enough information to get him interested, but not so much that he'd think I was having some kind of mental breakdown. Because let's be honest, calling your old college buddy in the middle of the night to potentially sabotage your wife's career probably qualified as at least a minor mental breakdown by most people's standards. I'm good, man. Listen, I know this is random, but I've got a question for you. You still working in compliance, right? At that big firm downtown? Yeah. Why? You sound weird. Like really weird. I took a deep breath and decided to go for it. You still close with the executive team over there? Like close enough that if something sketchy was going down, you'd know about it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in Adrian's head. He'd always been sharp as hell, the kind of guy who could spot a legal loophole from 3 miles away. If anyone could read between the lines of what I was asking, it would be him. Marcus, what the hell is going on? You're starting to freak me out a little bit. Look, I can't get into all the details right now, but I need you to trust me on this one. Remember how we used to talk about how the worst kind of corruption wasn't the obvious stuff, the embezzlement and the fraud, but the subtle stuff, the personal relationships that blur professional lines? Yeah, I remember. You wrote a whole paper on it senior year, right? Well, what if I told you that might be happening right under your nose tonight at whatever company event you guys are having? Another pause, longer this time. When Adrian spoke again, his voice had shifted into what I remembered as his professional mode. All business, no the quarterly celebration thing. That's tonight. How do you know about that? Because my wife works there and she dragged me to that party about an hour ago. And let me tell you, what I saw and heard tonight would make your compliance department very, very interested. Your wife? Wait, what's her name? Claire Hale. She's in the marketing department. Oh, Marcus. Man, you know her. I know of her. She's been on our radar for a few months now. Nothing concrete, just patterns, expense reports that don't quite add up. Travel schedules that seem a little too convenient, but we haven't been able to put together anything solid. Bingo. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Adrian wasn't just some random compliance drone. He was already suspicious of Claire's activities. All I had to do was point him in the right direction and let his natural investigative instincts take over. Well, tonight might be your lucky night, I said. Because what I witnessed about 20 minutes ago would probably qualify as the smoking gun you've been looking for. Question is, how quickly can you get back to that hotel? I can be there in 15 minutes. But Marcus, if this is some kind of marital revenge thing, it's not revenge, Adrian. It's justice. There's a difference. Okay. Hey, I'll bite. What exactly did you see? I told him everything. The conversation I'd overheard, the way Peterson had been touching her, the casual way she dismissed our marriage like it was some kind of business transaction. She could terminate at will. I kept my voice level and professional, sticking to the facts and avoiding the emotional stuff. But I could hear Adrian's breathing getting heavier as I talked. Jesus Christ, he said when I finished. If even half of that is true, it's all true. Every word. I'm already in my car. This instant. And just like that, the second domino started to fall. You know what they say about karma. It's with perfect timing and an absolute flair for the dramatic. While I was sitting in my car 3 blocks away, sipping lukewarm coffee from a gas station cup that tasted like liquid disappointment. The real show was just getting started back at that overpriced hotel ballroom. And thanks to the magic of modern technology and a few well-placed text updates from Adrian, I had a front row seat to watch my wife's carefully constructed world come crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. According to Adrian's play-by-play, which he was sending me in real time like some kind of corporate warfare correspondent, Claire was still holding court in the center of the room when everything went sideways. She'd apparently moved on from trash-talking her useless husband to regaling her audience with some story about how she'd completely revolutionized the marketing department's approach to client relations. You know, because nothing says professional accomplishment like taking credit for other people's work while your boss plays grab-ass with you in front of half the company. The music was still thumping away. Some generic top 40 garbage that probably cost the company more in licensing fees than they paid their interns in a year. The lighting was still that awful combination of disco ball sparkles and fluorescent hotel ambience that made everyone look like they were recovering from a mild case of food poisoning. And Claire was still the star of her own little show, champagne glass raised high, surrounded by her usual crowd of workplace syphons who laughed at her jokes because they were too scared of corporate politics to do anything else. But then something shifted. Adrienne described it like watching a nature documentary where the gazelles suddenly sensed the lions closing in. There was this subtle change in the atmosphere, a collective holding of breath that swept through the room like an invisible wave. Conversations started trailing off mid-sentence. People began glancing toward the entrance with expressions that ranged from curious to downright terrified. Even the bartender seemed to sense that something was about to go very, very wrong. That's when Mr. Harrington made his entrance. Now, I'd never actually met the guy, but Claire had described him enough times for me to paint a pretty clear picture. Regional director, late 50s, the kind of executive who'd clawed his way up the corporate ladder by stepping on enough faces to build a staircase. He was apparently the type of boss who could make grown adults wet themselves just by clearing his throat in a meeting. Claire had always talked about him with this mixture of fear and reverence, like he was some kind of corporate deity who could make or break careers with a casual comment. But the man who stormed into that ballroom wasn't the composed, intimidating executive Claire had always described. According to Adrian, This guy looked like he was about 30 seconds away from having a complete meltdown. His face was red enough to stop traffic. His tie was crooked and he was moving through the crowd with the kind of focused rage that made people scramble to get out of his way like he was carrying the plague. The music didn't stop immediately. Some poor DJ was probably too confused to figure out what was happening, but the conversation sure as hell did. Adrienne said you could literally watch the silence spread across the room like ripples on a pond, starting from wherever Harrington was and expanding outward until the only sound was the bass line from some mindless dance track that nobody was dancing to anymore. Claire, bless her heart, was apparently so caught up in her own performance that she didn't notice the change in atmosphere until it was way too late. She was mid-sentence in some story about client satisfaction rates when Harrington's voice cut through the music like a chainsaw through butter. Claire Hale Adrienne said the woman actually jumped, like literally jumped and spun around with an expression that went from confident to terrified in about half a second. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers and hit the marble floor with a crash that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent ballroom like a gunshot. The golden liquid splashed across her glittery dress and the shoes of the people standing nearest to her, but nobody moved to clean it up. They were all too busy staring at what was about to unfold. Harrington marched straight through the crowd, which parted for him like he was Moses and they were the Red Sea. When he reached Claire, he didn't hesitate, didn't pause for dramatic effect, didn't give her a chance to explain or apologize or do any of the things people usually try to do when they're caught red-handed. He just reached out, grabbed her by the arm hard enough to make her wooze and roared at the top of his lungs. "What the hell did you do?" The entire room went dead silent. Adrienne said, "You could have heard a pin drop. Except pins don't usually drop in hotel ballrooms during company parties. So really, you could have heard someone's nervous breathing from across the room, which according to him, you actually could because that's exactly how quiet it got." Claire's face went through about 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, fear, anger, desperation, and finally this awful kind of dawning realization that whatever was happening, it was bad. Really, really bad. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words, but nothing came out except this pathetic little squeaking sound. Peterson, her boss, her apparent partner in workplace inappropriate behavior, tried to step in at that point. Adrienne said the guy actually put his hand on Harrington's shoulder and started to say something about taking this somewhere more private, but Harrington wasn't having any of it. He turned around and shoved Peterson back so hard that the man stumbled into a cocktail table, sending glasses flying and creating even more chaos. "You think I wouldn't find out?" Harrington screamed, his voice carrying across the ballroom like he had his own personal sound system. "You think this company is your personal playground? You think I'm some kind of idiot who wouldn't notice when my employees are playing house on company time and company money?" That's when the phones came out, because of course they did. In today's world, nothing says career-ending scandal like having your professional meltdown go viral before you've even finished having it. Adrienne said people were pulling out their cell phones like they were at a concert, except instead of recording their favorite song, they were documenting the complete destruction of a woman's career in high-definition video. Claire looked around the room with the desperate expression of someone who just realized that all her bridges weren't just burned, they'd been nuked from orbit. Her co-workers, the same people who'd been laughing at her jokes and kissing her ass all evening, were now staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Some of them were backing away, literally putting distance between themselves and the radioactive fallout of whatever Claire had done. And in less than 2 minutes, Adrienne texted me. Her entire empire of workplace charm had crumbled into dust. "Let me tell you something about watching your life implode from a safe distance. It's oddly therapeutic, like popping bubble wrap or watching those satisfying videos where people organize messy closets. I didn't stick around to witness Claire's public execution firsthand because honestly, I'm not that much of a sadist. Plus, there's something to be said for maintaining plausible deniability when your spouse's career is getting nuked in real time. But, thanks to Adrienne's detailed play-by-play and the magic of modern communication, I had a better view of the carnage than if I'd been standing right there with a front row seat and a bucket of popcorn. The immediate aftermath, according to my newfound corporate spy, was everything you'd expect from a workplace scandal that had just gone nuclear in front of half the company's management team. Harrington had dragged Claire into one of those generic hotel conference rooms. You know, the type beige walls and fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look like they're dying of consumption. While the party guests stood around looking like they just witnessed a car accident and weren't sure whether to help or start taking pictures for their insurance claims. Adrienne had managed to position himself close enough to the action to catch most of what went down, which was impressive considering he was supposed to be there in a professional capacity and not as my personal intelligence operative. But then again, compliance officers are basically corporate detectives, so maybe lurking around scandal scenes was just part of his job description. The evidence, it turned out, was even more damning than I'd hoped. Screenshots of Claire's internal messages where she'd been talking about various company policies and referring to expense account regulations as suggestions for the weak-minded. Receipts from company F-Foon business trips that seemed to coincide suspiciously with Peterson's travel schedule, including a particularly expensive weekend in Miami that was supposedly for a client conference that, surprise, surprise, nobody else from the company had attended. But here's the kicker, and this is the part that made me actually laugh out loud while sitting in my car. They had recordings, actual audio recordings of Claire and Peterson discussing how to manipulate project timelines to create more opportunities for collaborative work sessions in various hotel rooms across the tri-state area. Apparently, someone in HR had been building a case for months, just waiting for the right moment to drop the hammer. The whispers had started before Harrington even finished reading Claire the Riot Act. Adrienne said it was like watching gossip spread through a high school cafeteria, except instead of teenagers talking about who was dating whom, it was middle-aged professionals speculating about severance packages and legal liability. People were already pulling out their phones, not just to record the drama, but to start covering their own asses because nothing says professional self-preservation like immediately distancing yourself from a sinking ship that's also on fire. Legal had apparently been notified before Harrington even showed up at the party, which meant that while Claire was busy getting hammered and talking about her useless husband, some lawyer was probably already drafting termination paperwork and calculating how much the company's insurance was going to have to pay out to make this whole mess disappear quietly. By midnight, Adrienne texted me. Claire's phone was buzzing nonstop with calls. She wasn't answering. Probably her work friends trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Or maybe Peterson trying to coordinate their stories before the lawyers got involved. Either way, she wasn't picking up, which was probably the smartest thing she'd done all evening. By 2 o'clock in the morning, she'd been escorted out of the hotel by security. Not arrested. Apparently, corporate malfeasance doesn't usually involve handcuffs unless there's actual embezzlement involved, but definitely given the old don't let the door hit you on the ass on your way out treatment. Adrienne said she looked like she'd been hit by a truck. All that earlier confidence replaced by the kind of shell-shocked expression you see on people who've just realized their entire reality has shifted fundamentally and permanently. Her work access had been locked by morning. Email, company credit cards, building key card, probably even her parking spot. All gone faster than you can say corporate investigation. It's amazing how quickly a company can erase someone's existence when they put their minds to it. One day you're an integral part of the team, the next day it's like you never existed except for a few awkward conversations around the water cooler and maybe a footnote in someone's compliance report. And me? Well, I spent the night sitting in my car in various parking lots around town, sipping coffee that got progressively worse as the hours wore on, feeling strangely calm about the whole thing. You'd think watching your marriage explode would be more traumatic, but honestly, it felt more like finally getting confirmation of something you'd suspected for a long time. Like when you keep hearing weird noises in your car engine and then the mechanic tells you the transmission is shot. Disappointing, sure, but not exactly shocking. I drove around aimlessly for a while, not ready to go home and face whatever conversation was waiting for me there, but not really having anywhere else to go either. It's funny how you can live in a city for years and still feel completely lost when your normal routine gets blown to hell. Every street corner looked familiar but somehow different. Like I was seeing everything through new eyes that had just learned a very unpleasant truth about the world. The strangest part was how normal everything else seemed. Traffic lights still changed from red to green. Late-night diners still serve coffee to insomniacs and shift workers. The world kept spinning even though my personal universe had just imploded. There's something both comforting and deeply unsettling about that kind of cosmic indifference. By the time the sun started coming up, painting the sky in those pale pink and orange shades that make everything look like a postcard, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to be the guy who crawled back home with his tail between his legs, ready to forgive and forget and pretend like nothing had happened. I wasn't going to be the understanding husband who accepted Claire's inevitable apologies and promises to do better. No, I was going to be something much more dangerous than that. I was going to be the guy who'd been planning his next move while she was busy destroying her life. And if there's one thing I'd learned from 8 years of marriage to a woman who thought she was smarter than everyone else in the room, it's that the quiet ones are always the most dangerous. Because while Claire had been busy burning bridges, I'd been building a whole new road. There's nothing quite like the sound of your soon-to-be ex-wife stumbling through the front door at 8 in the morning. Makeup smeared across her face like a Jackson Pollock painting made of mascara and regret. I was sitting at our kitchen table. Well, technically my kitchen table now, but we'll get to that little detail in a minute with my laptop open and a cup of coffee that actually tasted decent for once. Funny how everything tastes better when you're not choking down the bitter flavor of a dying marriage along with your morning caffeine. Claire looked like she'd been put through a blender set to life-destroying scandal and then reassembled by someone who'd never seen a human being before. Her hair was doing this weird thing where half of it was still trying to maintain the elegant updo she'd started the evening with, while the other half had apparently given up and was hanging in defeated strands around her face. That glittery dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent was now wrinkled and stained with what I could only assume was a combination of champagne, tears, and the crushing weight of professional humiliation. But it was her eyes that really told the story. Gone was that confident sparkle she'd had when she was holding court at the party, replaced by something that looked like a deer in headlights. If the deer had just realized the headlights belonged to an 18-wheeler carrying a full load of career-ending consequences, she looked around our living room like she was seeing it for the first time, which in a way I guess she was. After all, it's amazing how different your home looks when you suddenly realize you might not be living there much longer. What did you do? She hissed at me and I had to give her credit for going straight to the accusation without bothering with any of that pesky good morning no pretense, no attempt to play innocent, just straight to the part where somehow this was all my fault. Because of course it was. In Claire's world, bad things only happened to her when other people made them happen. Personal responsibility was apparently a foreign concept, like metric measurements or admitting when you're wrong. I didn't look up from my laptop immediately. Call it petty, but after 8 years of marriage to a woman who thought dramatic timing was a substitute for actual communication skills, I'd learned a thing or two about power dynamics. Let her stand there for a minute, I figured. Let her really absorb the situation she'd created for herself before I bothered to acknowledge her existence. When I finally did look up, I kept my expression neutral. Not smug, not angry, just empty, like I was looking at a stranger who'd wandered into my house by mistake. Good morning to you, too, sweetheart. Rough night. That's when she really lost it. Started going off about betrayal, about how her career was on the line, about how I'd sabotaged everything she'd worked for. The whole performance was actually pretty impressive in its complete lack of self-awareness. Here was a woman who'd been caught red-handed conducting an affair with her married boss on company time and company money. And somehow she'd managed to convince herself that I was the villain in this story. She paced around the living room like a caged animal, gesturing wildly with her hands and leaving little droplets of whatever she'd been drinking on our hardwood floors. The floors I'd spent 3 weekends refinishing last spring while she was off on one of her business trips that I now realized probably hadn't involved much actual business. You have no idea what you've done, she kept saying, like I was some kind of innocent bystander who'd accidentally triggered a nuclear weapon instead of a husband who'd finally gotten tired of being called useless by his cheating wife. My reputation, my career, everything I've built, everything you've built. I interrupted. Finally closing my laptop and giving her my full attention. You mean the career you built by screwing your boss and stealing credit for other people's work? That career, the look she gave me could have melted steel. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth. Point out that you've been lying to me for months. Or are you mad because I finally stopped being the quiet, useless husband you could push around whenever you felt like it? That's when I decided it was time for the big reveal. I'd been planning this moment for hours. Ever since I gotten home and started making calls to lawyers and accountants and various other professionals who specialize in untangling the messes that cheating spouses leave behind, it's amazing what you can accomplish in a few hours when you're motivated by righteous anger and armed with detailed financial records. You know what, Claire? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am going to destroy everything you've built. But not because I'm vindictive or cruel. Because you said I was useless and I wanted to prove you wrong. I opened my laptop again and turned the screen toward her. See this? Divorce papers already filed. And this bank statement's showing how I've transferred our joint savings into accounts with only my name on them. And this one's my personal favorite. Property deed transfers. Removing your name from the house title, the car titles, and pretty much everything else we own together. Watching the color drain from Claire's face was like watching a time-lapse video of someone realizing their entire life had just been repossessed. She grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter for support, her knuckles going white as she processed what I was telling her. You can't do that, she whispered. But we both knew she was wrong. I absolutely could do that, and I had done it all perfectly legally and with the help of some very expensive lawyers who specialized in making sure that cheating spouses got exactly what they deserved. Actually, I can. Turns out that when you've been married to someone for 8 years and you've been paying attention to things like joint accounts and property ownership and prenuptial agreements. Oh, wait. We don't have a prenup because you said they were unromantic. You learn a lot about how to protect yourself when your spouse decides to flush your marriage down the toilet. I stood up from the table and walked over to where she was standing close enough that she could see I wasn't bluffing, wasn't exaggerating, wasn't playing some kind of elaborate prank. You said I was useless to you, that you could dump me anytime you wanted. Well, Congratulations, Claire. You just got your wish. Except instead of you dumping me, I'm dumping you. And unlike your approach, I'm doing it legally, thoroughly, and with documentation. The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. For once, in our entire relationship, Claire had nothing to say. You know what's beautiful about a well-executed plan? It's not the big dramatic moments that everyone remembers. It's the small, quiet details that hit you like a punch to the gut when you least expect them. By evening, Claire had apparently processed enough of her morning shock to move from denial into what I can only describe as frantic damage control mode. She'd spent most of the day on her phone, probably calling every lawyer in the phone book and getting the same answer from all of them. Ma'am, if he filed the paperwork correctly, and you signed the prenup, there's not much we can do. I'd made myself scarce for most of the afternoon. Partly to give her space to fully absorb the magnitude of her situation and partly because I had some loose ends to tie up. Amazing how much paperwork is involved in dismantling a life you've spent 8 years building, banks to visit, accounts to close, forwarding addresses to set up. It's like moving house, except instead of packing boxes, you're packing up someone's entire existence and shipping it to a destination they didn't choose. When I got back around 6:30, the house was eerily quiet. No sound of Claire stomping around and slamming doors. No phone conversations where she alternated between sobbing and screaming. Just silence, which in my experience is usually a sign that someone is either plotting revenge or having a complete mental breakdown. Sometimes both. I found her in the living room sitting on our couch. Well, my couch now technically staring at her laptop screen with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for people trying to defuse bombs or figure out IKEA assembly instructions. She didn't look up when I walked in. Didn't acknowledge my presence at all. Just kept typing and clicking with the desperate energy of someone who believes that if they just work hard enough, they can somehow undo the laws of physics and make the last 24 hours disappear. Any luck with the lawyers? I asked, keeping my voice conversational, like I was asking about her day at the office instead of her attempts to legally challenge the systematic destruction of our marriage. She didn't answer, which was probably for the best. I wasn't really expecting her to engage in polite conversation anyway. Instead, I headed upstairs to finish the last few details of my exit strategy, leaving her to whatever digital Hail Mary she was attempting downstairs. That's when the real fun started. I was in the bathroom packing up my toiletries, electric toothbrush, that fancy face wash Claire had bought me for Christmas that I'd never used, the prescription glasses I only wore when my contacts were bothering me. When I heard the bedroom door slam open with enough force to rattle the picture frames on the wall. Marcus, Claire's voice carried all the way down the hall, high-pitched and desperate in a way that suggested she'd just discovered something that had shifted her understanding of reality in a very unpleasant direction. I took my time finishing up in the bathroom, carefully wrapping my toothbrush in a travel case, and making sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. No point in rushing to witness someone's mental breakdown. They'll still be having it when you get there. When I finally strolled into the bedroom, Claire was standing in front of our walk-in closet, my former walk-in closet, with her mouth hanging open like she'd just witnessed a magic trick that had gone horribly wrong. She was staring at the empty space where my clothes used to hang, her head turning slowly from left to right, like she was watching a tennis match played by invisible players. My side of the closet was completely bare. No suits, no casual shirts, no jeans, no ties, not even the ratty old bathrobe I'd had since college that she'd been trying to throw away for years. Just empty hangers swaying slightly in the air-conditioning breeze and the faint outline on the carpet where my shoe rack used to sit. Where? She started, then stopped, then started again. Where are all your clothes? I leaned against the doorframe, enjoying the view of someone discovering that their reality had shifted while they weren't paying attention. Move them, I said simply. Seemed like the right thing to do considering. She spun around to face me, and I could see her brain trying to process this new information on top of everything else that had happened. It was like watching someone try to solve a jigsaw puzzle while riding a roller coaster. Lots of frantic activity, not much actual progress. Move them, where does it matter? That's when she noticed the manila folder sitting on the dresser where my cologne bottles used to be. It was identical to the one I'd given her that morning, except this one had her name written across the front in my careful handwriting. She approached it like it might explode if she breathed on it wrong, which wasn't entirely unreasonable given how the last manila folder had worked out for her. What's this one? She asked, though her voice suggested she already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Open it and see. Her hands were shaking as she picked up the folder and flipped it open. I watched her face change as she read through the contents. Bank statements showing account closures, property transfer documents, insurance policy modifications. Every piece of paper was another nail in the coffin of the life she'd thought she was living. But it was the USB drive that really got her attention. It was sitting at the bottom of the folder like a tiny black snake labeled in my neat handwriting. Play me. She looked from the drive to me and back to the drive, clearly trying to figure out whether she really wanted to know what was on it, but curiosity or maybe just masochistic completeness won out over self-preservation. She grabbed her laptop from the bed and plugged in the drive. The audio started playing immediately, her own voice, clear as a bell despite the background noise of the party. Honestly, I can dump him anytime I want. He's completely useless to me at this point. Then her laugh, that sharp, dismissive sound that had been echoing in my head for the past 24 hours. The recording played for about 30 seconds, just long enough to capture the full context of her casual cruelty before cutting off abruptly. The bedroom fell silent except for the sound of Claire's increasingly ragged breathing and the distant hum of the central air conditioning cycling on. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the laptop screen like it might suddenly sprout legs and run away, taking all her problems with it. When she finally looked up at me, her face had gone through so many emotional transformations that she looked like a completely different person from the confident woman who'd walked into that party the night before. "You recorded me," she said. "And it wasn't really a question. I didn't have to," I replied. "You recorded yourself. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to capture it." The truth was I'd started recording on my phone the moment I heard her voice cutting through the party noise. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, call it whatever you want, but something had told me I was going to want evidence of whatever came next. "How long?" she whispered. "How long? What? How long have you been planning this?" I smiled at her then. The same calm smile I'd been wearing all day. "Since the moment you decided I was useless, Claire. I just didn't know it yet." There's something absolutely poetic about watching someone's support system crumble in real time. Especially when that someone has spent the better part of a decade treating you like you're lucky to breathe the same air as them. Claire was still standing in our bedroom. Scratch that. My bedroom, staring at that USB drive like it was a live grenade with the pin pulled when her phone started ringing. The ringtone was some generic pop song that probably cost her $5 to download, but it might as well have been a funeral dirge based on the way her face went white when she saw the caller ID. "Mom," she whispered, like saying the name out loud might somehow make the call disappear. But the phone kept ringing because phones are relentless like that. And eventually, she had no choice but to answer or let it go to voicemail. And knowing Claire's relationship with her mother, letting it go to voicemail would probably just result in 17 more calls and a surprise visit within the hour. Marianne Sean, Claire had kept her maiden name for professional reasons, which now seemed hilariously ironic, was the kind of mother-in-law who made other mothers-in-law look like soft-spoken librarians. The woman had opinions about everything from Claire's career choices to the way we arranged our living room furniture. And she wasn't shy about sharing those opinions at volumes that could probably be heard from space. She'd never particularly liked me, but she'd tolerated me with the kind of resigned acceptance usually reserved for chronic illness or tax audits. But here's the thing about Marianne that Claire had apparently forgotten in all her scheming and planning. The woman was sharp as a tack when it came to money and legal matters. She'd built her own real estate empire from nothing back in the 80s when being an Asian woman in business meant fighting twice as hard for half the respect. She could smell financial trouble from 3 counties away, and she had zero patience for people who made stupid decisions with their money. Claire answered the phone on the 5th ring, her voice artificially bright in that way people use when they're trying to pretend everything is fine, while their world burns down around them. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" But Marianne wasn't in the mood for pleasantries, apparently. Even from across the room, I could hear her voice coming through the phone speaker. "Sharp and cold as winter in Alaska. Why did I just get a notice that your name has been removed from the condo title?" And there it was, the moment when Claire realized that her little domestic drama had just gone nuclear. Because see, what Claire had conveniently forgotten to mention during all our years of marriage was that her mother had co-signed on a bunch of our major purchases, the condo, the car loans, even some of our credit cards. Marianne had insisted on it, claiming she wanted to help us build our credit, but really it was her way of keeping tabs on our financial situation and making sure Claire didn't do anything monumentally stupid with money. Which meant that when I'd started transferring assets and removing Claire's name from various accounts, Marianne had gotten notification letters for all of it. Every single transfer, every account closure, every legal document that officially severed Claire's claim to the life we'd built together. And Marianne, being Marianne, had probably spent the entire day on the phone with lawyers and accountants trying to figure out exactly how her daughter was. Claire started stammering some explanation about how it was all a big misunderstanding and she was working on fixing it, but you could tell from the way her voice kept getting higher and more frantic that she knew she was fighting a losing battle. Marianne had heard every excuse in the book during her decades in business, and she wasn't buying whatever Claire was trying to sell. "Stop. Marianne's voice cut through Claire's rambling like a machete through jungle undergrowth. Just stop talking for 1 minute and listen to me. The bedroom went silent except for the sound of Claire's increasingly desperate breathing. I stayed where I was, leaning against the doorframe like I was watching a nature documentary about the mating habits of corporate executives. Sometimes the best seat in the house is the one where you can see everything, but nobody expects you to participate. I've spent the entire day on the phone with my lawyer, your lawyer, and 3 different accountants, Marianne continued. Her voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that suggested she was about 30 seconds away from driving over here and handling this situation personally. Do you want to know what I found out? Claire made some kind of squeaking noise that might have been a yes. I found out that your husband, who you've spent years telling me is too quiet, too passive, too boring, has systematically removed you from every significant asset you two own together. And he did it legally, cleanly, and with enough advanced planning to make my estate attorney weep with professional jealousy. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. There's something deeply satisfying about having your work appreciated by a professional, even when that professional is your soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law who's currently reading your soon-to-be ex-wife the riot act. But Mom, I can explain. No, you can't. Marianne's voice had dropped to that deadly quiet tone that meant someone was about to get verbally eviscerated. Because there's only one reason a man spends this much time and effort planning his exit strategy, and that's because his wife gave him a damn good reason to do it. Claire's face was going through more color changes than a mood ring in a hot car. She kept opening and closing her mouth like she was trying to form words, but nothing was coming out except these pathetic little gasping sounds. You always thought Marcus was quiet because he was weak, Marianne continued. And I could practically hear the disappointment dripping through the phone. Quiet men aren't weak, Claire. Quiet men are dangerous. They watch, they listen, they plan, and they remember everything. And you just found out why. That's when Claire finally found her voice again. Though it came out as more of a wail than actual words. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was just supposed to be. It was just supposed to be what? A little harmless fun with your boss. A temporary arrangement until something better came along. Do you think I'm stupid, Claire? Do you think I don't know exactly what kind of person you've become? The silence that followed was so heavy you could have used it to anchor a boat. Claire stood there with the phone pressed to her ear, tears starting to leak down her cheeks, probably realizing that her mother, the one person who was supposed to support her no matter what, had just officially joined Team Marcus. You made your bed, Marianne said finally, her voice softer now, but somehow even more devastating. And now you get to lie in it alone. The line went dead, leaving Claire staring at her phone like it had just grown fangs and bitten her. She looked over at me with an expression that was equal parts desperation and disbelief, like she couldn't quite process that even her own mother had seen through her act. She hung up on me. Claire whispered. Yeah, I said, pushing myself off the doorframe. She did. And with that, Claire's last lifeline had just been cut. Tuesday morning rolled around like a hangover you didn't earn, and I was sitting in my new temporary apartment, a surprisingly decent one-bedroom place about 15 minutes from our old house. Drinking coffee that actually tasted good for once, and catching up on emails when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Not the usual spam and newsletter garbage that clogs up everyone's digital life, but actual messages from people I knew. People who, under normal circumstances, wouldn't text me unless someone had died or the world was ending. The first one was from my cousin Jake. Dude, is this your wife? Attached was a link to what looked like a Twitter post, which seemed weird because Jake usually spent his social media time looking at pictures of trucks and complaining about gas prices, not diving into workplace drama. But curiosity killed the cat, as they say, and I was feeling pretty immortal these days, so I clicked the link. What I found was beautiful in the way that car accidents are beautiful, horrible, and fascinating, and impossible to look away from. Someone had taken the audio from Claire's little performance at the company party and set it to a video clip of her from that night. All glittery dress and confident smirk raising her champagne glass like she was toasting her own brilliance. The caption read, "When you think you're untouchable, but karma has other plans. Nail polish # corporate life # instant regret." The audio was crystal clear, clearer than I remembered it being in person, actually. Honestly, I can dump him anytime I want. He's completely useless to me at this point. Then that laugh, that sharp dismissive sound that had been the soundtrack to my marriage's funeral. Whoever had edited this thing had isolated her voice perfectly, removing most of the background noise, so every cruel word hit like a slap across the face. But here's the kicker, and this is where I had to give credit to whoever had put this together. They'd added a little text overlay that appeared right as she said, "Useless to me." It read, "Plot twist, he wasn't." The post had been up for maybe 6 hours and already had over 2,000 likes for 100 retweets and a comment section that was absolutely brutal. People were going off about workplace toxicity, emotional abuse, karma coming full circle, and the general satisfaction of watching privileged people get their comeuppance. It was like watching a digital lynch mob, except instead of torches and pitchforks, everyone was armed with GIFs and crying laughing emojis. My phone kept buzzing as more people sent me the link, each message carrying its own flavor of, "Holy, is this really happening?" My old college roommate Dave sent it with just a string of fire emojis. My neighbor from 3 houses down, a guy I'd spoken to maybe 5 times in 8 years, texted me the link with, "Bro, your wife is famous." Even my dentist's office manager somehow found it and sent it along with a message that read, "Saw this and thought of you. Hope you're doing well." But the real entertainment was watching the thing spread through Claire's professional network like a wildfire in a drought. Adrian, my new favorite corporate spy, had been keeping me updated on the internal damage control efforts. And apparently, the video had made its way into the company group chat faster than gossip spreads through a small town church. The comments from people who actually knew Claire were particularly savage. Her former assistant had posted a crying laughing emoji with the comment, "When you finally see someone's true colors eyes." One of the junior marketing guys had written, "This explains so much about the last 2 years." Even people from other departments who'd probably never worked directly with her were piling on with stories about her attitude and general unpleasantness. Someone had created a whole thread breaking down the body language and facial expressions in the video, pointing out how she'd looked directly at Peterson while saying it, how her posture had been all confident and predatory, how she'd clearly thought she was performing for an audience that would appreciate her cruelty. The amateur psychology was probably, but it was entertaining that was getting thousands of views and shares. By noon, the video had jumped platforms. Someone had downloaded it from Twitter and uploaded it to TikTok with trending sound effects. Another person had made it into a reaction video on Instagram using it as an example of toxic workplace behavior and red flags in relationships. There was even a LinkedIn post from some business coach type using Claire's moment of viral infamy as a teaching moment about professional ethics and workplace respect. The beauty of social media is that once something goes viral, it takes on a life of its own. People who had never heard of Claire or her company were sharing the video just because it fit whatever narrative they wanted to push about karma or marriage or workplace drama or women behaving badly. She'd become a symbol, a cautionary tale, a meme, and probably not in any way she would have appreciated. But here's where it got really interesting. The viral clip wasn't just entertainment for strangers on the internet. It was starting to have real-world consequences. Adrienne texted me around 2 o'clock in the afternoon with an update that made me actually laugh out loud. HR is freaking out. Someone sent the video to the regional office and now they're worried about the company's reputation. Legal wants to know if they can make it disappear. Good luck with that. I thought trying to remove something from the internet after it's gone viral is like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. Theoretically possible, but practically a waste of time and energy that usually just makes the mess worse. The comment section had become a digital anthropology exhibit showcasing every type of internet personality you could imagine. There were the righteous anger types calling for justice and accountability. The trolls making jokes about marriage and gender dynamics. The armchair psychologists diagnosing Claire with various personality disorders. The people sharing their own stories of workplace bullying and toxic relationships. My personal favorite comment came from someone with the username @KarmaChameleon2024. Imagine being so confident in your own superiority that you announce your evil plans at a work party like some kind of corporate supervillain. This is what happens when people confuse being mean with being powerful. Another gem, the audacity of talking about dumping your husband at a company event while your married boss is standing right there looking like he's ready to volunteer as tribute. The second-hand embarrassment is real, but it was the comment from @Quietterm78 that really got me. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They're not plotting because they're weak. They're plotting because they're smart. This woman just learned the difference the hard way. By 5 o'clock, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times across all platforms. Claire had gone from unknown marketing executive to internet cautionary tale in less than 72 hours. Her professional reputation wasn't just damaged. It was digitally pickled for posterity, preserved forever in the amber of viral content. And the best part, this was just Tuesday. The week was still young. A week later, Claire got the call she'd been dreading since the night her world started falling apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. It came on a Thursday morning at exactly 9:15, delivered by someone from HR, whose voice sounded like they'd rather be doing literally anything else in the world than making this particular phone call. The message was short, sweet, and about as ominous as a message could be without actually including the phrase, "You're totally screwed. Miss Hale, we need you to come in for a meeting today at 2 o'clock. Please report to conference room B on the 15th floor. Bring your employee handbook and any company property you may have at home. Now, when HR tells you to bring your employee handbook to a meeting, that's corporate speak for we're about to destroy your career so thoroughly that archaeologists will find the wreckage centuries from now and wonder what the hell happened here. When they also ask you to bring any company property, that's them basically saying, we want to make sure you can't steal anything on your way out because we don't trust you as far as we can throw you. Claire had spent the week since the viral video went live in what I can only describe as a state of suspended animation. She'd been staying at her sister's place. Apparently, our house had become too depressing for her to handle. What with all the empty spaces where my stuff used to be. And from what I'd heard through various sources, she'd been alternating between frantic phone calls to lawyers and staring at her phone, watching her professional reputation get shredded in real time across social media. The video had taken on a life of its own, spawning reaction videos, think pieces about workplace culture, and even a few TikTok duets where people recreated her smug expression while lip-syncing to her own words. Someone had turned it into a ringtone. Another person had made it into a custom notification sound for when their ex texted them. The internet had basically turned Claire into a meme about karma and comeuppance, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. But the meeting that was different. That was the real-world consequences catching up to the digital humiliation. And there's something deeply satisfying about watching someone who thought they were untouchable finally get called to account for their actions. I knew about the meeting because Adrian had texted me that morning with a simple message. It's happening today. 2 p.m. Conference Room B. Bring popcorn. Not that I was planning to be anywhere near that building when it went down, but it was nice to know that justice was finally being served with a side of corporate bureaucracy. Claire spent the morning getting ready like she was preparing for battle, which in a way I guess she was. She'd apparently borrowed one of her sister's Powers suits, a navy blue number that probably cost more than most people's rent, and had gotten her hair done at some fancy salon that specialized in making people look like they had their together, even when they absolutely didn't. The makeup was flawless, the lipstick was perfect, and she'd probably practiced her innocent victim expression in the mirror until she could deploy it on command. According to Adrian's subsequent play-by-play, which he provided with the enthusiasm of a sports commentator calling the Super Bowl, Claire arrived at the building at exactly 1:55, walking through the lobby like she owned the place and nodding at the security guards like they were old friends instead of people who'd probably been instructed to escort her out if things went sideways. She took the elevator to the 15th floor with the kind of confident stride that suggested she'd convinced herself this was all just a big misunderstanding that could be cleared up with the right combination of charm, denial, and strategic tears. The kind of confidence that comes from spending your entire life believing that rules are for other people and consequences are something that happens to folks who aren't as smart as you are. But when she reached conference room B and pushed open those heavy wooden doors, whatever confidence she'd managed to scrape together probably evaporated faster than water on hot concrete. The room was set up like a tribunal, not the kind of casual, let's chat about your future with the company meeting she'd probably been expecting, but a full-scale corporate execution chamber complete with all the key players arranged around a massive conference table like judges at a trial. There was Patricia from HR looking like she'd rather be getting a root canal without anesthesia. There was Williams from legal, a guy who looked like he'd been born wearing a suit and had never smiled a day in his life. There was someone from compliance, not Adrian, thankfully since that would have been a little too obvious, but some other corporate drone whose job it was to make sure the company didn't get sued into oblivion. And at the head of the table, like the Grim Reaper wearing a business suit, sat Harrington himself. The same regional director who dragged her out of the company party a week ago. Except now he looked calm and collected instead of rage-fueled, which if you ask me is way more terrifying than someone who's obviously pissed off. The blinds were drawn, blocking out the afternoon sunlight and giving the whole room this artificial fluorescent-lit atmosphere that made everyone look like they were dying of some wasting disease. There was a monitor mounted on the wall that was currently displaying the company logo, but something about the way it was positioned suggested it wouldn't be showing corporate branding for much longer. Ms. Hale, Harrington said as Claire took the single empty chair that had been left for her, positioned, of course, so that she was facing everyone else like a defendant at trial. Thank you for coming in today. Claire managed a weak smile and some polite response about being happy to clear up any misunderstandings. But her voice had that tight, controlled quality that people get when they're trying really hard not to throw up or run screaming from the room. That's when Williams from legal opened his briefcase. And let me tell you, there's no sound quite like a lawyer opening a briefcase full of evidence that's about to ruin your life. It's like hearing the safety being clicked off a gun, except instead of bullets, it's loaded with receipts, documentation, and legally binding proof that you're completely and totally screwed. Before we begin, Williams said in the kind of monotone voice that suggested he'd done this dance many times before. I want to make sure you understand that this meeting is being recorded for legal purposes and that you have the right to have an attorney present. Claire's face went a little paler, but she managed to shake her head and mumble something about not needing a lawyer because she hadn't done anything wrong, which if you ask me is exactly what someone says right before they find out how very, very wrong they are. That's when the monitor lit up. The first image was a scanned receipt from a hotel in Miami. The Fontainebleau, to be specific, one of those ridiculously expensive places where a single night costs more than most people make in a week. The date stamp showed it was from 3 months ago during what Claire had claimed was a client development conference that she'd attended alone, except the receipt showed 2 guests. Can you explain this charge to the company credit card? Williams asked, his voice still perfectly neutral. Claire stared at the screen like she was trying to will it to spontaneously combust. There was a client dinner. I had to book an extra room for security purposes. The next image was a flight manifest showing 2 passengers, Claire Hale and David Peterson. Same dates, same destination. Security purposes, Williams repeated like he was tasting the words and finding them bitter. Interesting. More images followed in rapid succession. Hotel bills from Chicago, San Francisco, New York, all showing the same pattern of 2 guests, all charged to company accounts, all coinciding with Peterson's travel schedule. It was like watching a slideshow of corporate malfeasance. Each image more damning than the last. But then came the audio files. The first one was a phone recording of Claire's voice discussing project timelines with Peterson, except the projects they were talking about seemed to involve a lot more room service and spa treatments than actual work. The second was even worse. A conversation about how to coordinate their collaborative sessions to avoid suspicion from other team members. Claire's face had gone from pale to ashen to something approaching the color of old newspaper. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the water glass someone had thoughtfully provided, probably anticipating that she'd need something to keep her from passing out during her own professional execution. Ms. Hale, Harrington said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel through skin. Your employment with this company is terminated effective immediately. The words hung in the air for a moment, final and absolute as a death sentence. Claire opened her mouth to say something, probably to protest or deny or make some last-ditch effort to save herself, but Harrington held up a hand to stop her. Furthermore, he continued, the company will be pursuing all available legal remedies to recover the funds that were misappropriated during your tenure here. Our legal department will be in touch with you regarding restitution and potential criminal charges. Criminal charges. The words hit Claire like a physical blow, and I could practically see her entire future crumbling in real time as she realized that this wasn't just about losing her job. This was about potentially losing her freedom, too. The meeting lasted another 10 minutes, but it was really just paperwork and formalities at that point. Claire signed whatever they put in front of her with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the pen, probably too shocked to really understand what she was agreeing to. When it was over, security was waiting outside the conference room to escort her to her desk to collect her personal belongings and then out of the building forever. Her career wasn't just over. It had been obliterated so thoroughly that the wreckage would be visible from space. And somewhere across town, I was sitting in a coffee shop reading a book and enjoying the fact that justice, while sometimes slow, is usually pretty thorough when it finally shows up. At exactly 3:40 in the afternoon on what had to be the worst Thursday of Claire's entire existence, I was sitting in my car across the street from her former workplace, sipping a surprisingly decent latte from the coffee shop down the block and watching the corporate equivalent of a public execution unfold in real time. Not because I'm some kind of sadistic monster who gets off on watching people's lives implode. Okay, maybe a little bit, but because sometimes you need to see the final chapter of a story you helped write. The building where Claire used to have an office was one of those generic glass and steel monuments to corporate mediocrity that probably looked impressive to people who'd never seen actual architecture. All gleaming surfaces and sharp angles that were supposed to convey success and innovation, but mostly just screamed. We spent way too much money on a building that looks like every other building in the financial district. From my vantage point across the street, I had a perfect view of the main entrance, which meant I'd have front row seats when the star of today's show made her final exit. Adrienne had been texting me updates throughout the meeting, like he was providing commentary for some twisted sporting event. She's in the building. Conference room door just closed. I can hear voices through the wall, but can't make out words. Someone just called security to stand by. Each message was like another nail being hammered into the coffin of Claire's professional life. And I won't lie, I was enjoying every single ping of my phone. The weather was perfect for this kind of thing. If you believe in cosmic justice and meteorological irony, gray clouds rolling in from the west. The kind of sky that looks like it's about to open up and dump rain on everyone's parade. The wind was picking up too, sending loose papers and plastic bags skittering across the pavement like urban tumbleweeds. It was the kind of afternoon that made everything feel slightly apocalyptic, which seemed appropriate for what was happening inside the glass tower. I'd been parked there for about an hour, long enough to watch the normal rhythm of office building life play out in front of me. People coming and going, deliveries being made. The occasional smoker huddled near the entrance trying to get their nicotine fixed before heading back to whatever soul-crushing cubicle they called home. Normal people living normal lives, completely oblivious to the fact that someone's entire existence was being systematically demolished 15 floors above their heads. Then at 3:41, the main entrance doors swung open and there she was. Claire emerged from the building like she was walking underwater, moving with the kind of slow, deliberate steps that people take when they're trying really hard not to fall down. She was carrying a cardboard box, one of those generic office supply store boxes that companies use when they want to make your termination feel as impersonal and humiliating as possible. The contents looked pathetic from where I was sitting. A small desk plant that was probably already dying. A few picture frames, what looked like a coffee mug with some inspirational printed on it. 8 years of corporate climbing, networking, ass-kissing, and backstabbing, and it all fit in a box that probably cost $3 at Staples. Her power suit was still immaculate, navy blue and perfectly tailored. The kind of outfit that cost more than most people's rent and was designed to make the wearer look like they had their together, even when they absolutely didn't. But the woman wearing it looked like someone had sucked all the life out of her through a straw. Her shoulders were slumped, her head was down, and she was moving with the mechanical precision of someone who was running on autopilot because their actual consciousness had checked out sometime around the moment they realized their career was over. The security guard who escorted her out was trying to be professional about it, but you could tell he was uncomfortable with the whole situation. He was walking a few steps behind her, close enough to intervene if she tried anything stupid, but far enough away to give her some dignity during what was probably the worst moment of her professional life. When they reached the sidewalk, he said something to her, probably some generic corporate-mandated farewell about how her key card access had been deactivated and she shouldn't try to return to the building, and then headed back inside, leaving her standing there alone with her cardboard box of broken dreams. That's when she started walking. And let me tell you, it was like watching a zombie movie, except instead of craving brains, this particular zombie was craving some way to undo the last week of her life. Her heels clicked against the pavement with this slow rhythmic sound that seemed way too loud in the afternoon air. Click, click, click. Each step taking her further away from the building that had been the center of her universe and closer to whatever uncertain future was waiting for her. She made it about half a block before she stopped, standing there on the sidewalk like someone who'd forgotten where they were going or why they'd started walking in the first place. That's when she looked around and I could see her face clearly for the first time since she'd left the building. She looked destroyed, not just upset or angry or even devastated. Those are emotions that suggest someone still has some fight left in them. Claire looked like someone who'd been completely hollowed out. Like all the confidence and ambition and ruthless determination that had defined her for as long as I'd known her had been surgically removed, leaving behind just an empty shell wearing expensive clothes. Her makeup was still perfect. Her hair was still professionally styled. Her outfit was still runway ready. But her eyes looked like someone had turned off all the lights behind them. She was staring at nothing or maybe at everything with the kind of blank expression you see on people who've just witnessed something so traumatic that their brain has shut down to protect itself. That's when our eyes met. I wasn't trying to hide or anything. My car was parked legally on a public street and I had every right to be there, but something made her look in my direction. Maybe some instinct left over from 8 years of marriage. Some unconscious awareness that the person who'd orchestrated her downfall might be nearby to witness the finale. When she saw me, her entire body went rigid. Not angry rigid or scared rigid, but the kind of frozen stillness you see in animals when they suddenly realize they're being hunted. Her mouth opened slightly like she was going to say something or call out to me, but no sound came out. She just stood there clutching her cardboard box of corporate debris, staring at me across 30 feet of city street like I was a ghost who'd materialized just to haunt her. For a moment, I thought she might try to approach me. There was something in her posture that suggested she was considering it. Maybe hoping for some kind of explanation or confrontation or final conversation that might make sense of what had happened to her life. Maybe she wanted to yell at me or beg me to somehow undo what I'd done or just ask me why I'd felt the need to destroy everything instead of just walking away quietly. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of any of those things. Instead, I just looked at her, really looked at her, taking in every detail of her professional defeat and personal humiliation. The way her perfect lipstick couldn't hide the fact that her mouth was trembling slightly. The way her designer suit couldn't disguise the fact that she was shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. The way her expensive haircut couldn't cover up the fact that she looked like someone who just realized that all the rules she'd thought she understood were completely wrong. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I didn't make any gesture of acknowledgement or triumph or even basic human recognition. I just sat there behind the wheel of my car, as calm and collected as I'd been for the past week, and let her see exactly how little effect her destruction had on me. Because here's the thing about revenge that nobody tells you in the movies. The best kind isn't hot and explosive and dramatic. The best kind is cold and calculated and absolutely final. It's not about making someone suffer in the moment. It's about making them understand that their suffering is the natural consequence of their own choices and that the person they hurt isn't even angry anymore. I wasn't angry at Claire. I wasn't hurt or betrayed or desperate for her to understand what she'd done to me. I was just done. Finished with her. Finished with our marriage. Finished with the whole toxic dynamic that had defined our relationship for way too long. She'd called me useless and I'd proven her wrong in the most comprehensive way possible. End of story. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, I started my car. The engine purred to life with that satisfied sound that well-maintained vehicles make when they're ready to take you somewhere better than where you've been. I put the car in drive, checked my mirrors like any responsible driver would, and slowly pulled away from the curb. I didn't look back, didn't check the rearview mirror to see if she was still standing there watching me leave. Didn't give her even that small acknowledgement of her existence in my world. As I drove away, merging into the afternoon traffic that would carry me back to my new apartment and my new life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete and utter peace. Not the temporary satisfaction of getting revenge, but the deep lasting contentment that comes from knowing that a chapter of your life is truly and permanently closed. Claire would probably spend the next few months, maybe years, trying to rebuild her career and her reputation. She'd have to explain to future employers why she'd been terminated from her last job, why there were viral videos of her being cruel and unprofessional, why her former company was pursuing legal action against her. She'd have to live with the knowledge that her own words and actions had destroyed everything she'd worked for, and that the man she dismissed as useless had orchestrated her downfall with surgical precision. But that was her problem now, not mine. The traffic light ahead turned green, and I pressed the accelerator, leaving the scene of Claire's professional execution behind me like a bad memory that had finally been resolved. In my rear-view mirror, the glass building where she used to work grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, taking with it the last physical reminder of a life I was grateful to be done with. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was something much more powerful and permanent than either of those things. It was closure. And closure, unlike revenge, doesn't need an audience to be complete. As I drove toward my new life, I couldn't help but smile. After all, she'd been wrong about one thing. I wasn't useless. I was just getting started.